Greetings and welcome back to room 303. This is the Hamilton's Mythology Lectures number 8. This one we will be talking about part 4 of Edith Hamilton's classic text, Mythology. In chapter 13 we're going to hear about the Trojan War. In chapter 14 we're going to hear about the fall of Troy. In chapter 15 we're going to hear about the adventures of Odysseus. And then finally in chapter 16, the adventures of Aeneas. Now, let's put this in our notes right away. This conversation that I'm having with you now is really the heart of Hamilton's mythology. It really is. It really is her best prose of the volume. Those who have read this book over the years have often commented on the fact that of all of the different parts, part 4 and her treatment of what is called, for your notes, the Troy, T-R-O-Y, tale, T-A-L-E, or Troy story. Now, why Troy we'll get into in a moment. But collectively, the story we are about to tell is the Troy tale. That's how we usually will reference it. Many, I will point out, have actually found their way to the 3 great epic poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, through the reading of part 4. In other words, before they ever read the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the Aeneid, those classic epic poems, they listened or read, right, from part 4 and began to get some sense of the storyline. And then that led them to want to, and I hope this will be true for you, if you haven't read any or all of those 3 epic poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, it'll maybe attract your attention. You'll say, maybe I can pick the poem up and read it. Especially because I kind of know what's coming. I know what I'm looking for. I know what's coming. Okay? Now, I've given individual lectures already on LearnStrong.net. I've given individual lectures on all 3 of those epic poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. But this is going to be kind of like a summarizing. Okay? I've also given already a kind of animated retelling of this called the Troy Tale on LearnStrong.net. Here what I'm doing is specifically emphasizing the information of Edith Hamilton, and so that'll be the work we're doing. Now, if you haven't been following me, I recommend that you do go to LearnStrong.net, find that down the left-hand side folder that says Mythology, and at least watch the lectures that precede this one because they all kind of tie together, or at least I hope that they will. Lecture 1 was my intro comments. Lecture 2 was that treatment briefly of the gods. Lecture 3 was my discussion of Demeter and Dionysius. Lecture 4 was my cosmogonic myths, the origination myths, the creation stories, as well as some of the earliest heroes like Prometheus is talked about. Lecture 5 was the 9 tales of lovers, as Hamilton will call it. Lecture 6 was about Jason, the Argonauts, and 4 other great adventures. And then finally, Lecture 7, the one that came right before this lecture, we talked about 4 great heroes that predate this Troy tale story. So, for example, Perseus, Theseus, Hercules, and Atalanta, none of those are actually in the story of the Troy tale, but they will be referred to or alluded to, and an allusion, A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, I'm already making a to-be observation. The allusion to prior heroes is going to come up a number of times in this Troy tale. Now, I made this suggestion before, I'll make it now again. I really do recommend that if you can get a copy of Hamilton's Mythology, I recommend that you read all of part 4 on your own, annotate on your own, and then let my comments here kind of help to facilitate and fill in the holes and the like, all right? Just to remind, we'll be working at our 3 levels of reading. Level 1, what does the text say? Summarizing. Level 2, what does the text mean? Here we divide. 2A, themes, messages. 2B, rhetoric, not what is said, but how it's said. And then finally at level 3, we answer the question, how can I relate to this information? At 3A, how can I relate to other texts, other titles, things that happen in the world? And then finally at 3B, and most importantly, how can I relate this information to myself? Why? Because we're always working with our learning theory in 303. Remember, that capacity to connect new information to old information. At no point in my Hamilton Mythology lectures is that notion of learning as connecting new to old more significantly important than in this lecture. Why? Because again, this is the heart, many will argue, of Greek mythology. If you're talking about Greek mythology, then you really have to come to this classic story about a famous city and a war that took place at that famous city. Now, as I've said already on Learn Strong, I've already given an animated retelling of this Troy tale. What I'm going to try to do now is to outline briefly for you specifically what Hamilton is going to say. Now, of course, Edith Hamilton has picked up a monumental, a prodigious task in trying to tell all this story in the 4 chapters as we'll be looking at them. And obviously, I'm picking up a pretty difficult task as well, because I can't do it all. If I had my rathers, I would actually just read everything from this part forward for you verbatim, because her prose is so stellar. And in fact, I will jump in every once in a while just to demonstrate to you the power of Edith Hamilton's prose. But I'm going to have to even pick high points as well, which is why, again, I recommend you do the reading on your own. Now, let's talk about, for your notes before we begin, this Troy tale. As we've already said, many have argued, this is really the heart of Greek mythology. It's its high point, it's its apex. And the ideas and the stories of these collectively called the Troy tale, you can't find it in one place. That's why Edith Hamilton is so important. There's all different strands of the story. So for example, if you pick up the Iliad and you read it, much of the stories that we'll be talking about in collectively this thing called the Troy tale, you're not going to find them there, or you might find them just briefly referenced or alluded to, but you're not going to know about them, okay? So we'll obviously have to do that. However, there's a couple of different ways we can break this Troy tale down. Let me give you a couple of schematas that I think can help you. One, the first one is to break it down into 3 parts. We have those stories that are pre or before the Iliad. So pre-Iliadic stories, if I use that term, that will mean stories that are going to all subsume prior to the Iliad. So in other words, when Homer writes the Iliad, that great song of war, and people are either listening to it in the early days or reading it later, there's an understanding that there's certain parts of the story that have already transpired. For example, the sacrifice of Iphigenia by Agamemnon, Agamemnon's own daughter. He sacrifices her. We'll get to it. That's not actually in the Iliad as a story. It's referenced in the Iliad as a story. But if you don't know it, you're kind of like lost. So pre-Iliadic stories. Of course, too, makes sense, the stories of the Iliad. This, of course, is the actual war at Troy, but not its fall in the Iliad. But we will kind of assume it as we do this schemata. And then finally, what we'll call the post-Iliadic stories, that is to say, the return of the heroes, the fighters at the walls of Troy. Now there's another way to break it down. Let me give you a second schemata that you might want to jot down. There's another way to kind of briefly tell this story. Part 1, again, it's a tripartite breakdown. Part 1, Paris, a Trojan, will take Helen, the queen of Sparta, a Greek. This will start a major war. Okay? Helen, this drop-dead gorgeous woman, she has a face that launched 1,000 ships, it's said. In other words, the Greeks get torqued and they go to the walls of Troy to fight against the people who live in Troy. They are called Trojans. Okay? Part 2, you have the actual war, the fights. And we got all kinds of fighting that's going to happen. We have physical fighting. We also have linguistic fighting. We'll have environmental fighting. We got all kinds of violence that will take place. And then finally, part 3 will be the fall of Troy and the aftermath. That is to say, the return of all the heroes that are Greek heroes fighting at the walls of Troy. Now, spoiler alert for those of you that don't know, Troy is this amazing city that ultimately will be destroyed. Think of Troy as today New York City or Paris, or you can finish it. Whatever great city for you that there is, that's Troy, the greatest city of antiquity. A city that has walls that are as solid stone, thick as this room, and shoot up 40, 50, 60 feet into the air. We're told that chariots can ride abreast up on top, and the people who live in Troy are thoroughly convinced nothing bad can ever happen to them. Okay? All right, let's turn now. Chapter 13, the Trojan War is what Edith Hamilton calls it. And it all begins, as we said, with a city, Troy. And it all begins with a wedding on Mount Olympus. At the wedding, everyone is invited with the exception of the goddess of discord, Iris, E-R-I-S. She is upset. She makes a golden apple. Around the outside of the apple, she puts to the most beautiful goddess. She throws the apple into the room of the party, and immediately 3 goddesses will vie for the apple. Of course, it makes sense that Hera would jump up for the apple because she is Zeus's wife, and therefore she's queen goddess. And she says, the apple belongs to me. Immediately, Athena jumps up, and of course, Athena is the goddess of war, and she can beat basically every other goddess up. And so she says, the apple belongs to me, and I can use violent force to prove my point if I need to. The third goddess is, of course, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, right? And the goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite says, please, 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 if we're having an apple contest about who's the best looking goddess, clearly it belongs to me. Everybody looks at Zeus, and boy does this sound familiar, a guy who can't really make up his mind what he wants to do. So what Zeus does is he sends the three goddesses down to earth to a human being. But not just any human being, his name is Paris. Now, Paris is an interesting guy. Let's tell a couple of stories here about Paris. Paris is born the son of King Priam, the king of Troy. His mother, Paris' mother, is the beautiful Hecuba. But on the night that Paris is born, and by the way, for your notes, sometimes Paris will be often referenced as Alexander, okay, not just Paris, but sometimes Alexander. On the night he's born, a blind prophet, Tiresias, will say, this child must die, because if this child grows up, this child will be the reason that this great city of Troy will be destroyed. Well, Priam can't kill his own boy, and so he does the next best thing. He takes him out, he gives him to a shepherd. The shepherd raises Paris as his own. But in Greek mythology, when you're born the son of a king, you grow up to look like the son of a king. You're strong, you're handsome, all that Brad Pitt stuff. And so when we meet Paris for the first time, he's sitting under a tree, watching a bunch of sheep, thinking how his life could be so much better if he could find his way to the big city. Of course, he can't go to the big city, he's been told, for any number of reasons. Paris has no idea he is the son of the king of Troy, when all of a sudden these drop-dead gorgeous goddesses show up. Now this is what we call the judgment of Paris, and it will be the instigation for everything that follows, so obviously you want to sit up and take close notes. What happens? Three drop-dead gorgeous goddesses show up, and Paris, ladies, what can I do for you? We have a problem. Problem. I'm good with problems. What kind of problem? Well, see, here's the thing. All three of us think we deserve this apple. You get to decide which one of us is the best looking. Now, ladies, does this sound like a guy or two that you know? Immediately, Paris thinks, so in other words, I'm supposed to pick which one of the three of you is the best looking. That is right. So what do I get out of it? Seriously? So immediately this will be the question. And Hera says, you know what, you're absolutely right. Here's what we're going to do. Each one of the three of us are going to offer you something, okay? And you then get to decide which one of the three of us that we offer to you gets the golden apple. And Hera says, and I'll take care of the business right away. I'm Hera, queen goddess. I'm going to give you the world and everything in it. Give me the apple. But Paris is already looking over her shoulder, seeing Athena standing there, and he says, yeah, but what's Athena going to offer me? And Athena pushes Hera out of the way and says, I'm so glad that you asked, because here's the deal. I'm the goddess of warfare. I will give you the capacity to destroy all of your enemies, especially those disgusting Greeks. Right? Remember, Paris is Trojan. And then you can have the world. Give me the apple. But Paris has already looked over Athena's shoulder and seen Aphrodite, who's kind of standing there, out of the way, minding her own business. When Paris, yo, what are you going to offer me? Oh, me? Oh, I don't have very much to offer you at all. Now, this has always been the question of this part of our story. How can you explain the fact that on the one hand, a guy is offered everything in the world, the money, the power, everything, and on the other hand, Aphrodite says, well, the only thing I can offer to you is one night with the most beautiful woman in the world. Bam! Immediately, Paris will give the apple to Aphrodite. Two things about this. One, for your notes, this is huge. Immediately, Hera and Athena, because they've been rejected, outraged. Outraged. This cannot be happening. Over some stupid girl? He gave up everything for a girl? Are you serious with me? We should point out, they don't forget. They never forget. In other words, from this moment on, Hera and Athena have promised themselves that the city of Troy will pay for the judgment or the decision of Paris. Number two, Paris has no interest in any of this. What he's interested in is the promise that there may be a woman at the end of this, giving of the apple to Aphrodite. That woman is an important woman. Her name is Helen. She is queen of Sparta. Her husband is Menelaus. And it will be now to that part of the story that we will turn, sometimes referred to as the abduction of Helen or the taking of Helen by Paris. Here's how it works. Helen is a daughter of Zeus and Leda, a god and a mortal. She is the sister of Castor and Pollux. In other words, let's just put it in your notes this way. Helen comes from serious family stock, all right? Her father, Tyrindus, makes all of the men who come to want to marry her, right? And we heard these stories before about how beautiful Helen was even when she was young, right? So all these guys show up to want to marry Helen. Father, really intelligent. He makes every one of them make a vow, a promise. If I choose you, then you will have to marry her. If I don't choose you, then you have to promise that at any point in her life you will stand for her honor and go to war in her defense. Well, of course, every guy is conceited enough to think he's going to be the one that gets chosen. So every guy signs the vow, makes the vow, right? The guy who got chosen was Menelaus. And because of that, Menelaus has this amazing standing army that will come at any moment, notice, to defend Helen. This will obviously factor into our story. Well, Paris shows up. We can make this part of the story very quick. Paris shows up. Menelaus and Paris become pals. With the help of Aphrodite's son Cupid, who shoots that little arrow into the hearts of both Paris and Helen, they fall in love with each other. Menelaus goes away on a journey for a battle, and when he returns, Paris is gone, his wife Helen is gone, and of course this will lead to then the decision to go to war. So let's go ahead and say it out loud for your notes. What starts all of this mess that we will call the Troy tale begins with the guy who takes another man's wife and takes her back to the greatest city in the world, Troy. When he arrives back in Troy, Priam will admit that he's his father, Hecuba his mother. They invite both of them into the city, and of course the Greeks now have serious reason to go to war. The calling of the troops is the next part of our story here. The challenge here for Agamemnon is he knows he needs 2 warriors to go and defeat the Trojans. 1, he needs Odysseus. 2, he needs the great Achilles. Problem, both of them have not arrived. They are nowhere around. The rumor is that Odysseus has lost his mind. He in a field will plow and then throw rocks, sometimes salt, into the field. Whereas young son Telemachus, his beautiful wife Penelope are mourning the fact that the hero has lost his mind. Agamemnon is not so sure. He goes to the island of Ithaca, where sure enough he finds Odysseus out there in a field, tearing up the field with these huge oxen. And there's young Telemachus standing there watching his father. And Agamemnon is going to test it. So he takes the young boy, throws him in front of the oxen. Immediately Odysseus pulls back on the oxen, and Agamemnon says, "You're not crazy, you just don't want to go to war." And Odysseus is like, "I don't want to go to war." And you're right, I'm not crazy. They tell Odysseus, this will take no time. We got to go into Troy. We got to get Helen back. It's 2 months, no problem. Odysseus will leave. This is huge for your notes. Odysseus will leave Ithaca, believing he'll be back in a few months. He will not be home to his wife Penelope, to his young son Telemachus. He will not be home for 20 years. It's huge. Okay? When Odysseus leaves, first question is, where's the greatest warrior of them all? Achilles. Let's say 2 things about Achilles. Achilles is a very special kind of man. He is born to Thetis, a nymph, and she wanted to try to make him immortal. So she took him down into Hades, the underworld, and she stuck him inside of the river Styx. That water covers his little body, and he grows up so that he cannot be wounded, he cannot be hurt, which makes him an amazing warrior. However, Thetis has been told that the next battle, war, that Achilles goes to, at some point in that war, he will die, even though he seems to be immortal with this Teflon coating from the river Styx. So Mama has told her boy, you will go and you will live out the rest of your life in the court of Lycomedes, and you'll be dressed as a woman incognito. So Achilles is living there. Odysseus hears about this story, and so he's got to go and find Achilles, and this is the way he does it. It's kind of ingenious. He goes to all the different courts of all the different kings, and he says, hey, can I give diamonds to your wives? Remembering, of course, the kings will often have more than one wife, right? Of course, you bet, to all the women, give as many diamonds as you want, and the women will attack the chest where all the diamonds are, and then sitting in the middle of the diamonds, there's this sword. Well, he goes to this one really out-of-the-way place, and there he does the same gig with the diamonds. And when the sword hilt comes up, this woman steps out from the shadows, and she grabs a hold of the sword, and immediately Odysseus goes, Achilles, it's you, let's go to war. And Achilles is more than happy to get out of his pantyhose and go on to war, and so that's exactly what they do. They all amass and are ready to leave. The troops are at Aulis, A-U-L-I-S, when the strong north wind hits. The soothsayer, Calchas, is brought in, and Calchas will say, Artemis is upset. Last night, her favorite rabbit, hare, was killed along with the children of hers, and Artemis is mad. Agamemnon's like, right, what do I have to do? Sacrifice 1,000 goats or something? No, Artemis wants your daughter. My daughter? My daughter, Iphigenia? That's exactly right. So we have a very interesting and sad and tragic story. Agamemnon will go to his wife Clytemnestra and say, honey, I've got great news. Our daughter is to be married to the young, stunning warrior Achilles. Clytemnestra is like, I don't have time. I can't get everything put together. No, honey, this is going to happen tomorrow. No women are allowed at the wedding. We're going to marry Achilles off to our daughter. We're going to go off and fight this war at Troy. And when we come back, we'll have a real wedding. Clytemnestra mama says, okay, but you take good care of my daughter. Don't worry, she's as good as dead. I mean, no, she'll be fine. That night, poor Iphigenia, all night long, so excited, because the next morning she's going to get married to